All right, Alexander, let's do a video dedicated to Ukraine Commander Zaluzhny and what is going on there. Mark Milley, a few days ago, or spokesman for Mark Milley, a few days ago, said that he had spoken to Zaluzhny and all is good. We had Danilov. He came out with a statement just a day or two ago, and he said that Zaluzhny reported to the commander-in-chief the other day, and Podolyak has also come out with a statement saying that all is good with Zaluzhny. Then you have RIA Novosti reporting that Zaluzhny has had surgery for head and leg injuries, and while he will be okay, he will not be able to perform his duties as commander-in-chief. One thing is certain: Zaluzhny was a commander who would regularly take interviews, regularly make statements. He was not shy in terms of appearing to the press or to give updates on what was going on with the conflict. And for the past couple of weeks, he has indeed stopped making those appearances. So, what do you make of this situation?
This is extremely interesting, and can I just say, I mean, we've also had a video yesterday, which is I think all of 30 seconds long. I mean, I've seen it. It's very brief. You see Zaluzhny, somebody who looks like Zaluzhny. I'm sure it is Zaluzhny, sitting in a sort of desk in a room, talking to someone. We're told it's on the 25th of May. I mean, the people speaking say it's the 25th of May. He doesn't look to me like he's had surgery or been injured or anything of that kind. But in a way that deepens the mystery, because, you know, if he'd been injured, if he'd been wounded, if he'd been taken to hospital and treated, well, that would provide an explanation for this very strange behaviour. The fact that perhaps he hasn't been wounded, it doesn't seem as if he's been seriously ill, or any of these things. I mean, the Ukrainians have never said that he is. Begs many more questions. Why is this person who, as you absolutely rightly said, was giving interviews, was making himself very noticeable, was never shy of publicity, was, liked to have his photograph taken in all kinds of situations and circumstances, had become something of a sort of media hero in the West. He appeared on the cover of, I can't remember which magazine, but anyway, he was on the cover of one magazine in the US, The General and all of that. What's happened to make him, in effect, disappear for, well, now the better part of 3 weeks, is a very interesting question. And if he's not ill, if he's not wounded, why this change in behaviour? Now, the Ukrainians have provided no explanation for it. Now, you could come up with all kinds of reasons. You could say, well, he's busy, putting the finishing touches to Ukraine's grand strategic master plan to launch this great offensive, and, he's a very busy man and he doesn't have the time to give interviews. Fine, that's an explanation. If that is the explanation, why have we not been given it? I mean, that's one thing. So, what is the reason for this? Now, in previous programmes, I think we've discussed my own personal view that the Ukrainian military leaders, Zaluzhny, isn't happy with the offensive. He isn't happy with the fight in Bakhmut. There's lots of reports that he advised pulling back from Bakhmut. He's basically gone into a huge sulk and a work to rule, and is absenting himself entirely from the battle, and he isn't attending NATO conferences, which is another thing we didn't mention. I mean, an important NATO meeting with NATO defence ministers and military officials, and he skips that. Supposedly he's gone to a wedding, or so is it a holiday in Cyprus, or whatever it is. It could be that he's working to rule. I have to say, this is going on for too long, even for that to be a fully convincing explanation, in my opinion. And I'm wondering whether we aren't now seeing some kind of political crisis in Kiev, with Zaluzhny at the centre of it. I mean, there's been rumours for a long time that Zelensky and Zaluzhny don't get on with each other, that Zaluzhny gives advice to Zelensky, which Zelensky doesn't want to hear, that Zelensky has been trying to find means of sacking Zaluzhny, replacing him with Syrsky. Syrsky is now apparently himself in trouble because he lost the Battle of Bakhmut and his great counterattack there was a failure. So, maybe there's something going on there, that the Zelensky-Zaluzhny partnership has basically collapsed, or it could be something deeper still, and it might be connected, and I'm increasingly thinking it probably is connected, with Zelensky's numerous trips out of Kiev. In one of his recent broadcasts, by the way, Zelensky said that he was soon going to be leaving Ukraine again. So, he doesn't want to be in Kiev. Zaluzhny is disappearing. There's now starting to be rumours of unrest within the military. Bakhmut might have been, the catalyst for all of this, for all I know. So who knows? Perhaps what it is not so much Zaluzhny working to rule as biding his time. And we could perhaps be in for a political crisis before long. But the longer this goes on, the more damage it's doing, I suspect, to Ukrainian morale, because Zaluzhny, whatever kind of a general he actually is, there's been lots of talk which would lead you to think that he's some kind of military genius. But whether or not he is that, he has become so much a symbol of the Ukrainian military that, if he really is absenting himself from the battle, if he's become like a kind of Achilles who's withdrawn to his tent, you know what I'm referring to. If he's the hero who won't participate in the battle, then that's going to have a very bad effect on morale. And the longer this goes on, the greater that effect is going to be.
Yeah. Remember that incident about maybe a month or two ago with the interior minister?
Yeah.
And we never really got an understanding what happened there when that helicopter crashed, and the interior minister, I believe that's who it was, along with most of his staff, from what I understand, they all died in that helicopter crash and under very mysterious circumstances. We've been reporting for a while now that, like you said, that Zelensky and Zaluzhny never got along. But connect some dots, Alexander. You mentioned that Zelensky doesn't want to be in Kiev. That's obvious.
Yes.
Crystal clear. He wants out of Ukraine. He wants out. Syrsky lost the Battle of Bakhmut. Syrsky doesn't want to be associated with this upcoming big offensive. That's clear. Syrsky doesn't want anything to do with this big offensive. Zaluzhny, in whatever state he's in, we don't know. He has also made it clear that this offensive is something that is not going to go over too well. I think he's been talking about how an offensive is not going to go over too well months ago, but
yes,
obviously Zaluzhny is in wherever he is. He has made no secret that he doesn't believe in a big offensive, at least not in the state that Ukraine's military is in. We have the Kremlin drone strikes. We have various articles coming from the Collective West saying that Ukraine was behind the Kremlin drone strikes. Ukrainians were behind the Nord Stream sabotage. We have the incursion in Belgorod. We have people like Budanov talking to the media more and more and talking about how Ukraine is going to continue to push forward with terrorist types of strikes inside of Russia and going after journalists and even political leaders, even Vladimir Putin and Prigozhin. They mentioned that they're going to target them as well. Something is going on. And then you have all of this is happening in the backdrop of Nuland, Sullivan, Blinken, Biden demanding an offensive.
Yes. Yes. Well,
this is what's going. What's happening here?
We can just add a few more dots to that, because at the time when the Interior Minister and his officials were killed in that helicopter crash, and there have been lots of rumours ever since that they were actually shot down, that the helicopter was shot down, which have never been proved and never been disproved. As far as we know, whatever investigation there's been, very little information has been provided. I mean, very little indeed. But if you remember, at that time, there was a massive purge going on of Ukrainian officials in Kiev. And I've studied the people who were getting sacked, and it seemed to me that they were people who were close to Zelensky. I mean, that's what it looked like to me. And you mentioned...
And Burns made his trip.
Exactly. Burns made his trip. Exactly. Which was all going on at about that time. Now, bear in mind, at that time, you mentioned Kirill Budanov, because the culminating point in this purge was supposed to be the sacking of the defense minister, Alexei Reznikov, and his replacement by Kirill Budanov. And we got to the point where a senior member of, I think it was one of Zelensky's own party, a member of the Ukrainian parliament, senior member of the Ukrainian parliament, actually came out and said that the decision had been made. Reznikov was going to be sacked. Budanov was going to take over. Reznikov was going to be appointed Minister of Strategic Development or some, incomprehensible thing. But Budanov was going to be put in overall charge of the Defense Ministry. And then, suddenly, it all stopped. We got a meeting between Zelensky and Reznikov. Reznikov said he didn't want to go. He was confirmed as defense minister. Budanov remains intelligence chief. And the entire purge suddenly ceased. It came to a complete sudden stop. And then shortly after, who turns up in Kiev? None other than Joe Biden, President of the United States. He meets with Zelensky. He appears to endorse Zelensky again. He suggests that Zelensky is, the person he wants to remain president of Ukraine. And now, a couple of weeks later, we have similar odd things starting to happen. Zaluzhny very unhappy, making himself invisible. 2 brief videos, one of him speaking to a conference in Odessa, except that apparently there's doubts about that video. The one that was released yesterday, in which, as I said, he seems to be, in effect, removing himself from the whole situation. As I said, Sirsky is far away in Donbass. He's not playing any role at all in the organizational planning of this offensive, as far as I can see. I mean, he clearly has no belief in it. Or, alternatively, he's been exiled to Bakhmut and its environs, which seems bizarre, actually, given that he's the commander of the ground forces and the number 2. And, of course, we have Zelensky now travelling around, going from one place to another all the time, staying away from Kiev as much as possible. And we have Budanov becoming increasingly outspoken. He's on television all the time. He's taking credit, if that's the right word, for all these dodgy things that are going on, and assassination attempts, border incursions, terroristic activity. I mean, that's how I would define it. And you get these mumbling, critical pieces appearing in parts of the US media. Now, I have to say, to me, it looks like a power struggle, a visible sign of a power struggle, with Budanov angling again for some kind of position, more senior position in the Ukrainian government, and perhaps positioning himself against Reznikov, of whom we've seen much less, by the way, also over the last few days, and perhaps ultimately Zelensky himself. Now, I say that. There's some who say that Budanov is close to Zelensky, But I do wonder whether, in fact, he's become increasingly, he's quite a young man, increasingly headstrong, feels himself in control. He's got all the intelligence and security agencies now working for him, apparently, and whether he's preparing to make some kind of bid for power. Because, to me, all of these very strange signals point to some kind of political crisis in Kiev of some sort.
Is it fair to say that we're seeing a shift in what's happening in Ukraine as to how they're fighting against Russia? In that we're seeing the military side of things. I don't want to say lessen or taper off. I'm not exactly sure of the right words here, but we're seeing things shift from a focus on military and military strategy and fighting a conflict with Russia, and it seems like Budanov and the types of activities that he's been doing and he's been leading. It seems that those are taking precedent.
Yeah, I think they are.
That's where we're moving towards. And
yes, I think that
you know what I mean. Belgorod,
absolutely.
Kremlin drone strikes.
Absolutely,
trying to hit Crimea. These types of things.
Yes, I
going
think,
after journalists.
Exactly, I think so. But bear in mind that the two, they would probably say, if you ask Budanov, he would probably say that the two complement each other, because we've had all of those reports, both from sort of neocon aligned people in the US writing articles, and people in Ukraine as well, who are basically saying that the whole purpose of this offensive is to strike terror. It's to terrify the Russians, and that the offensive will succeed by paralyzing and panicking the Russian leadership and causing the Russian troops to flee, So all this kind of psychological behavior that Budanov is undertaking now, it could very well be that what he's basically saying to Zelensky is, forget about if it is Zelensky that he's talking to, or he might be deciding things for himself. You might be saying, well, let's not waste time with, proper military strategy anymore. If we do, we all accept that this offensive can't succeed. We've got 30,000 men who've been trained up to a point by the West. That's not a huge force. We have a couple of hundred tanks, most of which are old Soviet tanks. We don't have enough infantry fighting vehicles. The Russians have control of the skies. The F-16s are going to come soon enough. Even Milley was saying that today. So let's throw out that kind of, old book, war book. Let's instead do this completely differently. Let's fight this war through propaganda and media manipulation and psyops campaigns. Try to scare the Russians, make them think that this offensive, when it comes, is going to be a huge affair. Panic the soldiers, panic the leadership in the Kremlin, panic the commanders, and that will be how we will win the war. After all, if we continue to fight it as a war of attrition, we will lose. Sooner or later, we will lose. So at least Budanov could say, well, this is a strategy. This is a means, a possible means to victory. Now, I don't for a moment believe he's right, but I could see that it might be appealing, especially after the Bakhmut debacle, where, as I said, it became very clear that, Ukraine threw everything it had at Bakhmut, trying to hold on to the place. It then threw everything it had, trying to break the flanks of the Russian forces. And it failed. And as I've mentioned in a number of my videos, at one point there were apparently 35 brigades of the Ukrainian army positioned in and around Bakhmut, 27 at another point. It fluctuated. But anyway, scores of brigades. And Ukraine is proposing to carry out this big offensive with just 9. So the commitment that was made in terms of numbers of units to try to capture Bakhmut was actually greater than the numbers of units that have been allocated to this brigade, to this offensive. Now, of course, you can't say that all of these brigades have the same numbers of men and machines. No doubt the ones that are assigned for this offensive have more men and more machines. But I was reading a piece recently which said that, in fact, the brigades that have been put together for the offensive have between 2,500 and 3,000 men, not the 4,000 to 5,000 that they should do. So we're not talking about a huge force. Well, there it is. It might be that, if you're losing, if you feel yourself to be losing, your air defense system has run out of missiles. The air defense systems you're getting from the West aren't enough and aren't working. You haven't had many tanks. You haven't had many infantry fighting vehicles. You're suffering enormous losses on the battlefields that you turn increasingly to the kind of tools that Budanov is suggesting. And one could see how that might carry some kind of traction.
No, it makes sense. I mean, I'm not saying it's something that's going to work. I'm not saying it's going to panic the Russians or it's going to lead to a victory in this war by panicking Russia and creating all of this hysteria. But if you take a step back, Ukraine cannot win this war. They can't win a war of attrition. That's obvious. Milley came out the other day and he said that the F-16s are not going to be a game changer and Ukraine is not going to win a war in the air.
No.
That comes from Milley himself. So
I know, it's extraordinary that he would say that. Yeah.
Yeah, but he said it, and he's right.
Of the joint, he's
right.
obviously right. I mean, it's extraordinary that he's saying it just as after they've decided to supply them. But there you go.
I mean, yeah, but it's an admission. They're not going to win that either.
Yeah.
They've lost the economic shock and awe side of the conflict as well.
Yeah.
So when you take a step back and think of the collective West, Ukraine, and NATO's position in all of this, their air defenses are depleted. You think about what is the one area where they have a strength.
Yes.
It's in the media, the info war. And when you look at it, and I know you did a video on this, you look at the information side of the Belgorod incursion. And in the beginning stages, I'm not saying when it was all said and done, in the beginning stages, the first few hours, I don't know what the situation was like inside of Russia. I don't know what the Russian media was reporting. But I'll tell you, here in Cyprus and in Greece, there was a large percentage of the population and a lot of TV channels that were reporting, like the main TV channels, were reporting that the Kremlin government was in a state of collapse. Ukraine was effectively invading Russia. Villages were coming under Ukrainian control. And this looked like it was going to be the end of the Putin government. I mean, these are serious, reputable TV media channels that were buying into this. And even an ex-Polish general bought into this. And he made a statement the other day. And he said that as we see the collapse of the Putin government because of this Belgorod incursion, so too will the Belarus government collapse with the same type of incursion. So people bought into this.
Absolutely, they completely did.
Once again, I'm not saying Budanov's strategy is going to work because I don't know how Russians were seeing this Belgorod incursion and the whole media hype. But outside, in the first few hours, once again, I stress the first few hours, the media war was convincing people that the Putin government and the Russian Federation was under some sort of state of revolution.
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, it's the media in Britain, at least, is continuing to run with much of this, by the way. I mean, there's an article today in the Telegraph talking about the next Russian revolution. And it's very, very largely connected to the events that you've described. And if you go and look at all the various pieces that made up the information war campaign, which was completely, very carefully organised. It was certainly not spontaneous. It was absolutely went hand in hand with this attack on Belgorod. I mean, it was an extraordinarily sophisticated and very large operation. I mean, you got reports that a Russian helicopter had been shot down, that a Russian town had been occupied, that the Ukrainians had dug into several places and were in control of them, that hostages had been taken, that they were all over the place. Ukrainian drones were flying overhead, dropping these small little grenades, bomblets. But it created the impression that the fighting was over a much wider area than it in fact was. And as you absolutely rightly said, for a couple of hours on the first day, it looked as if something big was happening. I mean, and if you go back about 2 weeks before, when Ukraine started its counterattack in Bakhmut, you saw the same thing happen, actually. For the first couple of hours, the internet was flooded with stories of big Ukrainian advances and breakthroughs and Russian forces turning and fleeing in front of the Ukrainians and things of that kind. And again, it's clear that there was an information campaign underway. So yes, you could see that it does have an effect. Now, I don't think it's going to work, and I don't think it's going to work because the Russians themselves, the Putin government, the general staff, the Russian military, understand that that is part of Ukraine's toolkit. I have to say, though, that though the Russians know it, and that they're probably able to counter it at a military level, their own counter-information strategies remain as terrible as always. I mean, going back to Belgorod, there's about a whole day passed before the Russian Ministry of Defense actually came out with a statement about it. And by that time, that statement, all it said was, there was this incursion and we drove it back, and most of the people who were involved on the Ukrainian side were killed. So that was a whole day of stories coming out from Ukraine, and this terse, in some ways rather unhelpful statement coming out afterwards. It shows that the Russians are still hopeless at this sort of thing.
Yeah. So just to wrap it up, Zelensky doesn't want to be in Ukraine. He's outside of the country. Zaluzhny is fading away. Once again, whatever state he's in, we don't know, but he's definitely fading out of the scene. We're seeing a shift in tactics from the collective West and from Ukraine. And keep in mind that a lot of the media operations are being run by the collective West and by the three-letter agencies who are very, very good at this stuff. And so someone has to fill this hole that we have in Ukraine, and it looks like Budanov is that person that is
absolutely filling
this gap.
Absolutely, that's how it looks to me. And I would go back to those American leaks. They disapprove of all of this activity. They disapprove of it, or so they say. But of course, they allow it to happen, and they never take any action to bring it to a stop. So they are in effect complicit in things that they disapprove of and which they say are wrong. Now, I can't help but think increasingly that far from being real disapproval, that tells Budanov that he has complete impunity to go on doing what he likes. And I wonder whether that also means that there are some people in Washington who quietly support and approve of what he's doing and are perhaps helping him to do it. So, bear that in mind too. It does seem to me that over the last few weeks, Budanov's star has been very much in the ascendant in Ukraine. Zaluzhny, as you rightly say, seems to be fading. So does Syrskyi. However good as generals they were, something I'm not able to judge, they were conventional military officers. I mean, they fought wars like military officers, generals would do. Budanov is different. He seems to think, what shall we say, outside the box, sometimes in very alarming ways, sometimes in very crazy and dangerous ways.
Yeah, he comes off as a very sinister character, but
I
you know,
think
just
so.
just once again to wrap it up. I mean, yeah, he looks very sinister. You know, the other day, Welt, the German publication, they ran an interview with the deputy minister of defense. I forgot the guy's name, but he came out on a German publication and said we are absolutely trying to assassinate Russian President Vladimir Putin and Prigozhin and other Russian politicians. I mean, the West is going along with this, and they are encouraging it. And of course, we've had Lindsey Graham on many occasions talk about assassinating the Russian president. So there's no doubt that the West is, while they're saying they don't approve of these things, they're also pushing these things forward. It seems like they understand that the only war they can win is this type of war.
Yes, and of course it's one, it is incredibly dangerous. Secondly, it is completely wrong. You know, let's be clear about it. It's politically wrong. It's morally wrong too. I mean, this kind of thing one should never do. Bear in mind that the Allies during the Second World War never made any attempts to involve themselves in assassination attempts on the senior members of the German leadership, with one exception, which is that the British played a big role in organising the murder of Heydrich, who was the head of the SR, not the SD, the German Security and Intelligence Service, and was a very sinister and terrible man. But other than that, they made no attempts to organise the assassination of the political leadership of Germany because they didn't think it was the right thing to do. They thought it would be politically wrong, and I think they also had moral qualms about that. We don't seem to have that anymore. We've crossed that political and moral red line. We pretend to disapprove of these things, but in fact, we are happy to see them happen. And I get to say further that this is a desperate thing. I mean, if the West, deep down, really believed it was winning in Ukraine, it would not go down into the filth with this kind of thing.
Yeah. It's been an evolutionary process, though, when you look at Saddam to Gaddafi, and then they tried to do the same to Assad, and it failed. It has been an evolution, taking out world leaders, and I think they did cross that line in Libya. I mean, I think that was when they crossed the line, and they said now it's okay to take out world leaders in this kind of way.
Well, what was it Hillary Clinton said? We came, we saw, he died, and this after he was visibly murdered in the most brutal way, and and televised. I mean, it was all done, on film. I mean, it's just a terrible thing what she said. And you're absolutely right. I mean, we have lost our moral compass in this as on so much else.
All right, we will end it there. The Duran.locals.com. We are on Rumble, ODYSEE, BitChute, and Telegram. And go to the Duran shop, 10% off. Use the code GOOD DAY. Take care.